Yeah, no, I'm taking them home. You can't get them on the West Coast. The distributors never get them out there.
Well, listen, if there's some records, like when you're out on the West Coast, that, are here, that you feel like hearing, let me know, and I'll get them.
Yeah, well, see, the thing about me in gospel records is I usually don't know what to look for. So like...
Just like the
thing.
Browns.
Yeah, so what's groovy is a place like that where they have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. In Boston. In 2 or 3 places in Boston.
Yeah. Have you ever been up to the record shack on 120th?
I never have, no.
You want to go up there sometime?
Yeah, I'd love to do that.
Because they really got fucking gospel up there.
Right. Yeah, probably like Skip Wise. I'm sure it's like a regular East Coast trip, And they got all them singles, too. They got like, the best, selling 200 gospel singles of all time. Some incredible things. But like I say, I don't know what to look for. Or I wouldn't know what to say, I love this record or that record. I like to go in there and shop around.
Have you seen this cat that's talking about commercials?
Oh, yeah, this guy. So what's the story, Gary? Right. I love that guy.
I love him too. He's adorable.
He's a big hit. He was on the cover of New York Magazine.
Was he?
Yeah.
He's the guy that sort of personifies New York to almost everybody.
Right. That's the city.
Yeah, all right. That says it all, folks. Is basically the last chapter. Al wrote this book in 1960 about the Beatles. They talk about Kerouac, Ginsberg, McClure, and I'm going to add a brief end chapter, very brief, descriptive, taking them up from 1960 when the book was written till now.
Yeah.
So we're looking to you for talk about Neil Cassidy, basically.
Right.
And that also, at some point, if you have any thoughts about what you think the Beats sort of thing might have had on you, your thing, and also in the 60s.
Could you tell me it was like your first awareness that something was going on up in North Beach?
Well, when I was really young, when I was really a little kid.
You were sick, and I think you were 14, you started reading.
That was when I started. When I was reading, when I was 14 was when I got turned on, to a whole other world. Yeah. That was when I first flashed on it. But in San Francisco, North Beach is always, even when I was a little kid, always represented like a kind of a far out place. But it wasn't until, actually, my first exposure to any of that was when I was taking art classes. I was going to what's now the San Francisco Art Institute. It used to be the California School of Fine Art, and I went there like a couple of nights a week, like a night school thing. And it was like where the painters were, and it was in North Beach. So it was immediately like the art set in San Francisco. So that was my exposure to it, and out of that, came is when I first heard about the word beat, and it was before the beatnik thing, before Herb Cain was talking about it. I heard a teacher, a guy named Wally Hedrick, who's a good painter in San Francisco, and also plays guitar.
Yeah.
He mentioned that, that was like.
Yeah, I met one.
It came up in some kind of a rap. Some kind of like an art school, you know what I mean? Like a rap thing.
Did he use it in the context of like the beat writers or the beat generation?
Well, somebody asked, what is that? Somebody asked, what is that? And he just sort of said, he said, you're it. The beat generation.
See, originally they used the word beat like Kerouac.
Right.
They used it was because it was an expression. Man, I'm beat.
Right. That kind of beat.
It's like,
but Jerry
hey,
very much like that.
No, this was way back.
This is a long time ago. But that stuff had enormous influences on me. I mean, I don't remember exactly what it was that brought that thing to my consciousness, but at first it was just something, and later on it became something that I felt personally involved in. just because of that thing of being at art school, you know what I mean, with all the famous San Francisco painters, you know. And, you know, at that time, the Place was happening down in
Grand Street.
Yeah, Grand Street and all that stuff. And that was like, you know, that's when I first fell into those kind of scenes and started going to those places and hanging out, you know, like a kid. I was about 15.
Incredible coincidence. You picked up the guitar when you were 15. And that was the year Kerouac's book came out, that fall, October.
Yeah, I read that. I remember reading. I mean, that was a major influence, that book. You know, for everybody I knew.
But did you pick up the guitar before or after you read the book?
Oh, I played guitar before, because music in me is a whole life thing. And that was like something else. That was like, you know, waking up on a whole other thing.
So what year was it then that you first started going up to North Beach?
Let's see. It was right around when I got my first guitar, as a matter of fact. In fact, the reason I got my first guitar was that same teacher, Wally Hedrick, played acoustical guitar, and he brought a record of Big Bill Brunsey and his acoustical guitar to one of our classes. He also played banjo, four-string banjo, in one of the like jazz bands around San Francisco, traditional jazz. And I heard him play the guitar, and I heard Big Bill Brunsey on this record, and I just, you know. And then that's when I really decided, you know, I definitely do want a guitar. I'd been wanting one, you know, behind listening to rock and roll and all that stuff. And that was like what really, that kind of like pushed me over.
Can I ask you something? Is this kid?
No, that's Bill Kreisman. Oh, is that kid what? Who?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's him.
Two technical questions.
It's hard to remember that stuff, though. That's interesting.
So I'm just trying to figure out the year so I can place the scene that you first saw.
It must have been whenever I was 15.
1957.
Yeah, 57, I guess.
So that was pretty early.
Yeah, pretty early.
That was pretty early what was happening there.
Yeah.
It was just really starting to happen.
Yeah, in terms of really starting to come out, you know, really starting to come out. It was just before Howl and all that stuff started.
It was before the poetry.
Yeah, well, it was still a different kind of a scene. It was still an older. It was still dominated by like Benny Buffano and that kind of art, San Francisco art scene. You know what I mean? Which was like old time Bohemia. You know?
What was the year?
55. But a lot of what happened as far as the beats in general being popular was triggered by the road, because that was like the only bestseller.
Yeah.
Right.
Poetry doesn't bestseller.
But around San Francisco, all that stuff was like really.
It was really bubbling.
It was out in front, you know. I mean, it was on the front pages and stuff. You know, everybody was conscious of it.
Technical questions, because I like based the things I was thinking about on these, and I want to know how accurate or useful they are.
Mm-hmm.
And that is what you think both of that book, Right from Runner's interview of you, and also what you think of Tom Wolfe's book. Now you objected to some things in Wolfe's book. You thought that Kesey was less the center that Wolfe made him out to be, say Babs or Neil. But other than that, you know, like historically and accuracy wise, is that fairly accurate, as you recall?
You mean the Tom Wolfe
book?
No, not really. I mean, it couldn't be, you know. It was accurate about some things, but his way of gaining information about that whole scene was all after it was over and in anecdotal form, you know, people spinning anecdotes, which is, you know, it's never the way it was, and you really had to be there. You know what I mean? It wasn't for me. Those experiences were not like that book.
No, well, he romanticized them, I guess.
Or he didn't romanticize them enough.
Right.
You know, I mean, you know, to me that stuff is like the most significant stuff I've been through. You know, really. I mean, that was really important shit. And I don't know. I wouldn't know how to approach writing about it. But you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, that's the problem. I was thinking that. You know, to Wolfe, it's an accurate recreation of what happened.
Sure, because he's accurately reporting what he heard.
But everybody perceives it differently.
Right.
People can see the same incident, see it differently.
Of course.
A Rashomon.
Well, start with Neil.
Yeah, well, what's your first remembrance of meeting Neil?
Let's see. The first time I met Neil was nothing much. It was just some small shuffling around in St. Michael's Alley, which was this place in Palo Alto, and it was probably around 60. And I didn't really start to. I wasn't really in a scene with Neil until acid test days, so 64.
In other words, he was just a face.
Well, he was also Dean Moriarty. You know what I mean?
Had you already
Oh,
connected?
sure. I mean, everybody. You know what I mean? That stuff was like the place where I was coming from. Everybody knew all that, all those connections. You know, because everybody knew. You know, somebody who knew somebody who was. You know, and there were all these people around who were like who had been part of that scene, and you could, you know, it was all that stuff was.
Did you tell Dennis
out there.
something about how your consciousness was like changing out of the scene that you had been into, out of, you know, like in school, in the like greaser gang, whatever it was, you know, and then what this North Beach scene, and then Neil.
Well, there's a kind of a cycle of events. I mean, the first I remember starting to be like aware of something outside of whatever kid world is was when I was in the 3rd grade, and I had this like real colorful, light, bohemian teacher, young, you know, pretty, and on. You know, and the only thing I was good at in school was drawing and spelling. Those were like the only things I was really good at. And so she put me to work drawing stuff, you know, which is like I used a lot of energy, and I started to understand something about doing what you enjoy doing and what you can do well, you know, and working at it. That was like my first flash of that. And then there was nothing, a long period of nothing, and then when I moved out of San Francisco down to the peninsula, which is like the suburbs anywhere. You know, it's homogeneous. There's no real character to what's going on. And this was down near Palo Alto in Menlo Park. And I had a teacher in the 7th grade named Dwight Johnson. And this is the guy, this guy's an interesting guy all by himself in a small way. But do you know who Ed McClanahan is? He's a writer friend of Kesey's, good friend of Kesey's. And does some, yeah, and he teaches or something down at Stanford. But at the time that I was in the 7th grade, this guy Ed McClanahan was starting at Stanford, and this guy who was my teacher, Dwight Johnson, was a famous freak at Stanford. He was like really an unconventional person. He had like an MGTC, you know, and a Vincent Black Shadow. You know what I mean? He was like pretty racy for that scene at that time. And he used to, in the 7th grade, down in the suburban school, he was always bringing up, you know, like, and we were always getting into like controversial, crazy shit, you know, in class, which finally created a scandal, and subsequently he was fired for discussing something, you know, in class. And he's the one that turned me on to, like, reading. I mean, like, really, you know, heavy stuff like you know, those opening flashes when you start to suspect that the world is not the way you've been taught. And it's like by reading stuff like George Orwell and that kind of stuff, you know, those first primary little steps. And that kind of stuff, and then into heavier and heavier stuff. And that, like, really spun me out completely from school, you know what I mean? At that point, me and school were on completely different. I was like a total iconoclast, you know, really caught up in that flash of, you know, intellectual awakening, you know, like the first year of college or something like that. Anyway, but that was the point at which I departed from the regular world, and then from there it was like my interest in art had been going on steadily, and ended up with me moving back to the city, my mother moving back to the city and everything, and me going to art school like a couple of days a week, in addition to going to regular school in San Francisco. And school in San Francisco at that time was the jungle, right? It was the blackboard jungle, and there was that whole movie going on, and it was, and so, like, in school, regular high school, I was just like every other hoodlum, and except for when I'd go to my art classes.
Underground.
And all this time I was living on First Street, like downtown San Francisco, like by Skid Row.
Yeah.
And taking a bus all the way across town to go to this high school because my grandmother lived near there. I could go into the district. My mother didn't like the high school in the neighborhood, right? But I was living by the waterfront in my mother's place, going to art school, and getting off in that world, and then drudging through high school,
Well, did it have to be like a secret world for
It just
hoodlums?
Well, it was just like, for example, if my hoodlum friends go over to my house and saw my paintings, they'd rip them up and shit.
Right, that's what I mean.
So I had to keep it all kind of undercover.
With that gang, if you painted or wrote poems, you were assisted.
Right. It wasn't very cool to do that.
So you had to really keep it like a whole secret life then.
Yeah. Well, yeah, except that I wasn't able to do that, so everything else started slipping.
Right.
Everything started slipping.
Did you ride a bike with your hoodlum friends?
No. These were like more walking the street style hoodlums.
Oh.
Yeah.
So then you eventually went to the Army.
Yeah. I quit high school.
Right.
Well, my mother, in a last attempt to pull me out of the trip because I was into drugs and all this stuff, we moved finally out into the country, Northern California, down to Cazadero, which is up at the end of the Russian River, and really remote. I rode 60 miles to school.
That's when you got to Sebastopol.
How old
Yeah,
were you then?
Sebastopol school. I was 16. 16 or 17. No, 17.
For you?
Yeah.
Really?
Well, then, and she wanted to get out of the city.
Just
And all
you
that.
and her? And your...
And my stepfather.
So then you went to the Army and you ended up back down around Palo Alto.
Yeah.
Chateau.
Right.
Scavenging around, doing this and that, playing.
Yeah.
Then, you sort of saw casting around. Like, what?
Yeah, well, see, that's because, he was a famous figure, and you were conscious of him here and there. Every once in a while he'd turn up, But he wasn't like somebody that I really knew. I just knew who he was.
A dumb question here. Looking back now, do you think that you were consciously patterning your lifestyle after one direction or the other? I mean, you left the hoodlum, you left the hood world or lifestyle. I mean, you found yourself more and more drawn to the North Beach thing.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, just because it was the more attractive one.
Right. Do you remember any specific people other than like Neil Cassidy, who was like a star, and you couldn't really ever corner him to talk to him or get to know him at first? That you were like you thought were cool and were like patterning yourself after?
There were really a lot of people. I mean, really a lot of people, but no one specific. I mean,
but it was mostly those people that you were meeting up there then.
Yeah, and also, I was also patterning. I was improvising, but I had input. You know what I mean? It's like you go through stages where you have these various kinds of heroes, like Rambo, and different guys at different times. As you get turned on to them. Like when I was into painting, I had painter heroes.
Right.
I only knew of them because of historical shit, because of prints and stuff like that. I didn't have any first-hand contact, and I didn't get hip to like the contemporary thing until I really started being, exposed to it by going to that art school. That was the thing. And I went there in my mind, I was going there in terms of, I wanted to have an academic thing. I wanted to get it together. I wanted to do it like old style, And I just got, awakened to a lot of other levels when I went there because I was exposed to, people who are tremendous painters, really talented people and stuff like that. And it's like, when you're in that kind of environment, even if it's only twice a week, I mean, it's got to turn you on and
Were you playing
get you
music at
interested.
that point?
No, I've always played a little music, you know what I mean? At that time, the kind of stuff I was doing was playing the piano and singing. I mean, that kind of stuff I wasn't playing. That wasn't what I did. I was just a kid.
Were you playing at home?
Yeah, but I didn't, when I finally got the guitar, got into the guitar and all that stuff, all my art trip just, it went away. Everything
How
went
did
away.
that happen?
I wanted a guitar. And on my 15th birthday, my mother got me an accordion. This accordion, it's amazing, but it was beautiful, it was really far out, and I guess she thought I wanted it or something, but I was upset about it, because I wanted this electric guitar that was down in a pawn shop. So I, traded the accordion for the electric guitar.
So you pretty much lost interest in art.
Well, I didn't really, man. I really tried. I made an effort, I really made an effort because I was an amateur guitarist, right? I wasn't taking lessons or anything like that. I only knew a few little fundamental minor things, but I just found myself playing the guitar all the time. I would just get up in the morning and pick up the guitar and play it, And, that, when I got my hands on it, it just seemed like that was all I was doing. And I didn't really flash on that until after I got out of the Army, actually. That was when
So how did you start getting to know Neil better then?
Well, that's through the acid test thing, going up there, and he was there with Kesey and all that stuff. And, like my relationship with Neil Cassidy was, I was always stoned when I was with Neil.
How old was he?
Oh, he was, 40 or something.
He was always stoned when he was with you,
You were
too.
16.
Yeah. No, this is later.
Oh.
This is later.
Oh, right.
Like 65.
64, 65.
Oh, that late?
Yeah,
What?
How old are you now?
30.
You're only 30?
Yeah. I guess I better answer. In a Zen monastery and having chance encounters with your master, and it always blows your mind, and it's always just super heavy, and that's like, my whole relationship with him was on a level of a I couldn't describe it. He liked musicians. That was the trip. Neil really liked musicians. He got off on music. He liked my music. He liked my playing, and he loved to dance. He loved to do that crazy shit, to the music. And the Grateful Dead was like his cup of tea for that kind of stuff. So, and me and Neil Cassidy and Paul Foster, and there's, maybe one or two others at various different times were like a certain kind of, you take acid and you get high and you go in a certain kind of place. And it seemed like me and Neil and Paul Foster ended up in this place a lot together, and it's not really something you can, it's kind of like being shipwrecked.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You can't pinpoint what it is that's happening exactly or why, but you know that it's far out, and you know that you're thrown together on some far out level with these other people. And, that was where it was.
You found it compatible. You found a way
Yeah.
to work it out.
Right. It's tough to talk about,
It is. That's the thing. When I was starting to think, well, I was going to get all very efficient and say, well, please describe it. I'm just trying to think of
He was
how
the
I
most
describe
far out
the
person
first time
ever.
my trip
He was
and how,
incredibly
listening to
beautiful.
this.
Neil Cassidy was
He
just
looked
the
like
funnest
a movie
person
star,
ever.
man. He really did.
Yeah, I know.
Pictures I've seen. Incredibly handsome.
He looked great.
Yeah.
What you described in that book as a teacher.
Yeah. That's who he was to me,
I'm going to ask you some impossible question. What did he teach?
He taught me something about doing it 100%. Neil had a real, true, in control discipline that governed himself and that he used, and he was aware of it. The same as you're aware of. Well, the same as he was aware of his ability to drive. He was aware of his ability to keep up and to stay in the present and to, be working out all of the karmic stuff and all these trips simultaneously. And he was aware of when he was on it and when he wasn't on it, you know. And like, as far as I'm concerned, that's like is the highest kind of refinements that you can attain. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the thing. Everybody describes him with the impression you get from wherever you read it or hear about it. So he's, in a sense, a totally physical person. Totally, in a physical sense, that, you know, that 1/30th of a second.
Well, as a presence,
Right on it.
he was really
Total
physical.
energy.
But there was also, I mean, there was, you know, as far as I was concerned with Neil, there was lots of levels simultaneously, and people thought that he was, you know, like Neil's flipped out, you know, Neil's crazy, and Neil's this, and Neil's that, but, you know, like, he had it all working. And he knew what he was doing. He knew how he was doing it. You know, he was taking care of business while he was doing it.
Like his resiliency, like his way of making losses, defeat seem like victory.
I'm just, well,
That's what he said.
I'm not really sure about that. You know what I mean? I mean, I'm not really sure because dealing with Neil was like playing music. You know what I mean? He would like throw out a lick, you know, and you know, I would dig it. You know, it was like that kind of thing. It was like playing music, and you appreciate somebody who is so, you know, in time. It's hard to describe. It's I mean, it hasn't been described so far. It hasn't been said what it was. You know, and I think that he was a guy who was like in control of a form that hasn't been classified, but it's you know,
Well, first of all,
a Western model for getting high, I think.
First of all, he must have enchanted you as a storyteller, right?
No, my first, let's see, I thought of him as, my first big flashes on him were, he's the guy for whom talking movies were made, you know, because he's like, but also a show, you know, also a visual, and the whole thing was like a total expression, you know, and it was like, you know, my relationship to him at first was seeing him as somebody who was on, you know, and I was his audience initially, you know, and later on, because I never listened to like stories from him, and he wasn't telling stories when he was in that scene. He was doing something else. He was like, what he was doing was going into the cultural image bank and snapping, you know, with one little thing that automatically would set up a whole series of images, and you would understand what was happening. You know what I mean? It was like, it was really sophisticated, you know, and really together, you know. And whether or not it was something he was really doing or whether it was something I just thought he was doing, it doesn't matter, you know. I mean, the impact was immense.
I'm going to make a phone call, okay?
Sure. I mean,
I don't know why I'm asking you permission, but...
Neil's the farthest out person I've ever
Right.
met. You know, I mean, there was...
I don't think there's any doubt about that. Fred.
He was really
the last
fantastic.
20 years of America.
And funny, you know, I mean, you know, funny like the kind of funny that's just uncontrollable hysteria kind of funny, you know, like perfect funny, really funny. I mean, and there's, you know, I have, you know, I can like see him, you know, doing stuff. He used to have this hammer, and he'd throw it around, and he'd do stuff like he'd do those things, he'd be talking and stuff, and he'd like flip it up behind his back, you know, like a juggler would, to reach out and catch it and it'd fall, and he'd do this takes, you know, and all this stuff was going on, you know, like in the most brilliant, you know, slapstick, silent movie, whatever, totally physical thing, you know, and really, really, one time after the Watts acid test, everybody was, you know, buzzing and pretty weird. It was a weird night, everybody OD'd and everything. And we were sitting on Hugh Romney's lawn down when he was living in L.A., on his lawn, and George was trying to park the bus or something. And Neil was like really high. He'd taken really a lot of acid. And he was like nobody would let him drive. He was that high. And he was out there and back in the stream of dawn, directing the bus, the way you do in a garage, a little bit left and all that stuff. But it was like this amazing slow motion, beautiful pantomime, and the bus is slowly backing up, and he's directing, he's doing all this stuff and stuff like that. He directs it right into this pole, stops the pole and knocks it over. And then, George parks the bus, and Neil's picks the sign up, and he's starting to put it up, and he's doing all kinds of takes on it, like the famous drunk on the pole, and the pole's weaving and rolling, and he's doing this thing all around it, and not saying anything. And there's like two little old ladies are on their way to church Sunday morning, walking down the street, and here's Neil out there holding up this post, and he all of a sudden he does this whole number with, he starts by trying to hide it, behind his back, and then it was just, it was like those moments, they're like perfect. They were perfect, And it's like every time there was like that kind of perfection happening, and that was, when that whole trip about, what we need here is a movie camera, and a tape recorder, and get this shit on tape, Yeah. And there's a movie, Ken Babbs has got it, Page made it, that's a movie of Neil, and the soundtrack is Neil rapping, and it gives you a good flash about like how he moved, because it's got all his movements and stuff in it, his expression. I mean, his face, he had like a zillion expressions, all of them were amazing. He was like complete, he was completely communicative. 100%.
To me, it was always like Kerouac. Because Kerouac admitted that he caught this storytelling ability from Neil. Because Neil, when he would tell a story, he would play every role in it.
Right.
And each voice he would mimic and imitate the person, recreate like an actor
the stories,
different people that he was talking about.
Right.
And when he would recreate the dialogue, man.
And he'd also be like the narrator. And he'd make asides and all that. It was all in that great language. Totally.
Right.
And then he'd have these little parts that would rhyme, He had that like prison-style rhyming trick. Really down, he could do it just all the time, And it would, it'd be there, and it was just, there are some people who learned aspects of that stuff. Everybody learned like little pieces and bits and pieces of Neil Cassidy's. Like there's a certain group of people, if you put them all together in the same building, you'd have Neil there.
Right.
But there would be an incongruity, except it isn't with Neil. But I mean, this is terribly, total energy, total communication. And at the same time, he's got, as you say, he has it all under control. He's the person.
No, he didn't always. I said there were times when he was on and times when he wasn't on.
Yeah, okay, but I mean,
that's what I mean. And he was conscious of those times. He wasn't like acting out just something and not knowing what it was. He wasn't, there's a certain image of him in Kerouac's book. I think it's probably because Kerouac was always sort of a straight guy. There's always the reservation that Neil could be crazy, and that Neil's, you know what I mean? It's like, it doesn't fully support it. Eventually, Kerouac makes his break, because he couldn't go out on a limb like that, he couldn't be Neil Cassidy. And I think that he was just misunderstood. I think he was misunderstood by an awful lot of people. Because of that thing of knowing when it's there and knowing when it ain't, knowing when you're on and knowing when you're not. Like that's the difference between being conscious and being unconscious. And all those things that Neil did that you always hear about, he was doing with that kind of consciousness of what he was doing. He was conscious of how well he was doing all of it.
Try and figure out, how. I mean, the question everybody wants to know for themselves, I guess, is how do you figure that out? How do you know when you're on and when you're not on it? And how Neil managed to do it.
You just
But how do you get to the point where you can't?
Well, you have to start by doing something that has an on and an off to it. In Neil's case, driving is like a good way to learn that, because when you're off, man. You die, or you blow it and it's clear. You know what I mean? So there's like a real clear on and off.
But he was a tightrope walker, and he knew
Yeah.
when he knew when he was.
That's
teetering.
it. You know, like if you were to take up the tightrope, you would understand,
Yeah.
you know, on and off and on that level. It's like, whatever. If you're doing something and eventually you're doing it well enough to where there's a flow to it, you know what I mean? Then you know when the flow's there and you know when it ain't. And that's that same thing. But like most people do it the way I've done it, the way most conventional artists deal with that level is to take up a discipline, one specific thing, scope in on it, concentrate your energy on it, like an alchemist, and work on it, and that becomes your way of telling whether you're on or not, and then all your energy goes into that. Right. Neil's way of doing that was to eliminate the tool, you know, even though he probably wasn't conscious of it initially and used to envy that, you know, discipline. You know, eventually he became that whole thing, you know, all of his surfaces. If you imagine human beings as having many surfaces, you know, all of his surfaces were on that edge of onness and offness and being conscious of whether you're on or off, you know what I mean? The whole thing of balancing, you know, on the end of a step ladder, you know, and, you know, the kind of stuff that Neil could do. I mean, when he was on, he could really, you know, because he'd worked at it, man. He'd spent a lot of time doing it. You know, everybody else thought it was crazy weirdness, but, you know, he was working on it.
It's like total concentration.
What are
Well,
some of these weird
but another kind, an explosion outward rather than the kind of total concentration you have when you're, you know, like playing music is one, would be like, you could consider that one facet, one aspect. Sitting around and bullshit is another aspect. There are times when it's really flowing and times when it ain't nothing happening.
You'll get in touch with Ken. Do you know how we got involved in that whole
Just part of the same scene, you know, probably somebody wanted to score some pot somewhere and somebody knew Neil, you know, that kind of thing, just around.
Had him do, Ken, so it can be
How did the question still that hasn't been answered and maybe never will be is how did Neil fit in the metaphysics? I mean, how did
Nobody fit in.
well nobody everybody was just there.
That's why everybody fit in. I mean, well, Neil drove the bus. When he drove the bus, but above and beyond that, he was Neil Cassidy.
Yeah, just around.
And and the prankster scene was open enough and stoned enough to be able to see how far out he really was. You know what I mean? I think Kesey is one of the guys that really started to take Neil seriously, really started to understand what he represented in terms of how far you can go with being a human being.
What did Neil talk about? I mean,
Again,
I'm asking
everything. I mean, for example, before acid tests, a lot of times we'd throw a change, the E chain, and Neil would read, you know, like the judgment and stuff. And he would like read a paragraph and say, he would say, see, it's just like I was telling you the other day. And it would be turned into a story, back to the thing, back to the narrative, you know, off into, you know, I mean, it would be multi-referential, you know what I mean? If he was talking about stuff like cars or something like that, then there would be like a certain kind of flow to it. You know, and that was like one of the things he liked to talk about, cars and driving. And that was like one of his musical things. But then there was, you know, communication on, you know, like that reading the I Ching, stuff like that, you know, relating stuff to the now. I mean, he can really go in a lot of different directions. And keep it all together, you know what I mean? You know, not lose you.
Did you ever talk about, say, religion in any particular way? Like, you're talking about him as a Zen.
I know, but it's...
I could really see that.
You have to forget what all those things... You have to forget...
No conventional...
all the Eastern image that goes along with Buddhism, Zen, any of that stuff. Just forget all that stuff. And you know, and construct in your own mind, you know, that thing existing in the Western world, you know. Yeah.
Right.
He also was probably a saint because most of
Well, he was a saint.
Oh, you're probably a saint.
Did he ever talk? I know he was into education and that sort of thing.
Never talked to him about that. Well, he would mention those things, but he meant those were like notes. It's like he would say, it was like the time Ginsey said, you know, he would relate stuff on the basis of little bits and pieces, you know what I mean? So like if somebody was talking about something that Edgar Casey might have once spoke about, he would bring Casey in. But if somebody else had spoke about it, he would bring that in too.
He read a lot. He read all Edgar Casey's books.
Yeah, I believe it.
He was into Edgar Casey very heavy for a while.
I think all that stuff is the stuff that flashed him into far outness. You know, it's well, the reason he ended up with the acid test, because that represented new horizons, you know. After all the old energy was completely gone, you know. There was new horizons, new bright people, you know, who were into getting real high, you know, and checking it out.
Yeah, he was looking for the new scene and always finding it.
Right.
And it's not finding it, it's creating it.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, after the Kerouac on the road era was over, you had to go someplace else.
And there was no place to go for a long time until LSD came along.
But then,
When did he start to disintegrate?
He never did. I never saw him disintegrate.
How did he die?
I don't know how he died. You know, people say no, he didn't die. He didn't die. I think if he died of some kind of drug, he probably didn't know what he was getting. He didn't die from alcohol. He wasn't a juicer. He wasn't a juicer. You know, and they don't do autopsies in fucking Mexico, and you know, so there's no telling what he died of. He might have just died. He might have just split.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, any of those possibly.
He was young, fairly young, right?
Well, he was certainly not in bad shape, and the last time I saw him, which was probably about maybe 3-4 months before he died, he was in perfect shape. You know, he was Neil Cassidy on his way to Mexico.
Something might have just given out.
Yeah.
He was in his car when he died, you know.
You ought to talk to JB. That's the chick that lived with him when he was in Mexico, when he died. You know her? Her name is Janet Brown, believe it or not, and I think she might live in New York. She's an actress.
You know anybody who might know how to track it down?
No, I really don't. I knew her for a while. She used to come to Grateful Dead shows all the time and stuff. She doesn't have.
There's like a whole mythology about Neil sort of being a kidnapper or suburban teenage women. Sort of,
I don't think that's...
not
that ain't
kidnapper
really
in that
what's...
sense, psychological.
Neil had more like...
Little
Neil had lots of like weird... seemed to me he had like a certain kind of real weird karma with women.
Yes, he did.
And, you know, you'd see him around with young girls and stuff like that. But, you know, I mean, really, he was always like, it was more typical to see him hassling with Anne Murphy. Anne Murphy was like his girlfriend, and she and Neil were kind of like a scene in themselves. She was like a foil, in a way.
Everybody has one.
Yeah, and they had real weird scenes. Long, complicated trip, you know.
I was just wondering, because this is, I mean, it seems to me that he made a very conscious attempt not only, to get high himself, to get other people high too, more and more. I mean, it seems to me it's one of the things he did with Kerouac, to work at getting Kerouac high.
Right. Well, he could see from some place, from his soul, he could see limitless horizons, and he could see that you could go on forever. I think he was right. I think that
at least it hints at all those things that you want to do, and that you used to think you want to do, that you thought were beyond the realm of possibility.
They're there.
So suddenly you took a big step toward it tonight, I think.
Yeah, I did. It's been blowing me out. I mean,
yeah.
I'm not satisfied, but I never am.
Yeah.
But I'm happy with the progress. Yeah.
Probably the best you want.
Yeah, I would say tonight was a big night for you.
From the beginning. Yeah, Doug said too.
Yeah. He was good. He's real good. I love this fucking old dude. Well, I've known Doug for a long time. He's always been good.
He's always been good, but he never had it together the way he's gotten it together.
That's true. He's got it good and together.
Would you say, was there, if there was a difference, what was the difference between Neil Straight and Neil Trippett?
No difference. I mean, Neil was sometimes tired, and he was sometimes, withdrawn. I mean, he was human, but, he liked a little speed. He always liked a little speed. He was always looking for pills, uppers, bennies, whatever, that kind of stuff. And that would kind of help him along. But I never, it depended on the situation. Stone, high,
It was just his environment that got him on.
It's hard to say. It's hard to say. I can't really know because I can't know. I don't know. I only know him in terms of that dynamic between me and
What
him.
kind of collection do you have? What do you have in that collection of Neil Cassidy stuff?
On Neil Cassidy stuff, nothing.
I thought you were... Like,
I was trying, what there is of Neil Cassidy stuff, the things that I know of that exist are from that whole era, are some tapes that Kesey has. They have the most stuff, the Prankster Archives. They have the most Neil Cassidy stuff. And there's one other great tape this guy named Ray Anderson has that was this acid test we did at the Matrix, this old club in San Francisco. Neil did a thing that was he became a nightclub stand-up comedian for about an hour. There with the microphone and everything, this guy recorded the whole thing. It was just amazing, and there was nobody there but friends. We were all high, and he did this rap that was just totally amazing, and there's a beautiful recording of it in existence somewhere. Funnier, man, than Lenny Bruce or anybody. Really incredible.
Do you think it's possible to... Who was the guy?
A guy named Ray Anderson. He used to have something to do with the Matrix, and I know a bunch of people that know him. He's in San Francisco. Somebody was going to make a record of that tape, in fact, at one time. Those same people that put out the historic Dead record, that record.
Could you give me a hint of the contact? Get hold of him?
Let's see. Who would be somebody really that might be really good? Maybe Bill Graham. Oh, you don't get along with Bill. Let's see. Rock might be able to dig him up for you. He's right around somewhere in San Francisco. I see him periodically. And then there's a tape that little excerpt in Hank Harrison's book of Neil Cassidy. There's a tape, a full tape of that whole long thing that Dusty Street, who's a San Francisco disc jockey, her old man has. George Casey. And there's that film that Page has of Neil. That's really the finest single thing.
I was thinking of something that we might excerpt.
That one, if you could get that one from the Matrix, that one is fantastic. That one is fantastic. If you could track those down, those are really exceptional.
I'll get it to rock.
Yeah. And any of the tapes that Kesey's got some good ones too. Especially of Neil's automobile racing and driving.
Did he ever talk about people you know before Cadillac or Ginsburg?
He'd mention Ginsey. Yeah, he'd say Ginsey.
In an approving way, or?
Oh, sure. Usually it was like saying Ginsey said. there was like a certain style of a way of a certain anecdotal style that was around that scene. And it was usually like if you were trying to make a point, you would usually use somebody else's words. You know what I mean? It's still happening in that scene, and you can pick it up occasionally. It's the thing of, saying, like Paige was telling me this morning, blah, 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 and there's the punch, and like Neil didn't have it, and he would say Kinsey, or Gavin Arthur, or...
Did he mention Jack very well?
Kerouac never. I've never heard him mention Jack.
Did he show any other, traits, things that you felt you might have picked up from the On the Road days?
Stuff that I can't talk about. I don't know how to talk about it. I just don't know how to talk about it. It's a certain way of being. There's a certain knack. But it has to be like the right kind of situation. I can't do it like Neil could just be that. He could create that situation. But it's one of those things where if I find myself in a situation where things are moving that way, I can jump into it. I know how to do that. But it's kind of like a tool that you only use in special occasions. Like if I get together with Kesey and Babs and a few of the pranksters from the old scene and stuff like that around a tank of laughing gas, then a lot of Neil comes out. Because it wasn't really so much Neil, but it's what he exposed of the higher self. You know what I mean? It's like, it's far out. It's something far out. Really.
Yeah, well, the point is what I'm looking for is the impossible. It's an attempt to define on a lower level what goes on an upper level, and then just sort of...
Well, Neil used to talk about some pretty off-the-wall things, too. For example, he used to say that he had been, in one of his previous lifetimes, he'd been a policeman on Mars. Did you ever hear that? He'd been a cop on Mars. That was one of the reasons, and he felt that was one of the reasons why his karma was the way it was, and why he was working the way it was. In fact, he'd spent at least one lifetime as a cop on Mars.
Did
Can you talk about what it's like to be a cop on Mars?
Never went into it. But somebody might have heard him. I mean, I'm sure that, like Kesey would be a good guy to talk to, because he's spent a lot of time with Neil, really a lot. Him and Babs both, and they both watched real careful. They really did.
Did Neil ever talk about his childhood?
No.
His father and that sort of thing? Because that was,
He had a picture of his father in his wallet. Picture of his father. Yeah. And his wallet was like his history. He had a wallet routine kind of thing. And at odd moments, he might pull out his wallet, which would be this big, fat, amazing collection of stuff, and he would just start spreading things out. There would be all kinds of remarkable, billions of traffic citations, all these weird, strange documents, little fragments, odd stuff, his picture of his father, that kind of stuff. It was like a thing.
Remember anything else out of that wallet?
No. The picture of his father was what blew me out the most.
Because I don't know if you've ever read his autobiography, The First Third.
Oh, yeah.
So you like to put that. He came from... the thing you try and figure out or whatever.
Neil never did spend much time looking back.
Yeah,
He didn't. He spent most of his time looking, stepping ahead. And hanging out with Neil and stuff like that, even, in mellow moments, it was never that kind of thing where you're reminiscing or there was never any of that. It was always like, right now, what's going on right now, and stuff like that. Jump in the car and go over to somebody's house to pick up somebody who's going to take us over to Oakland, where we're going to pick up, this and all this other shit.
Always pretty much always in movement.
Motion.
Totally. Kerouac's mother talked about how he came over there once. And he freaked her out because he literally would not, according to her, sit in any one chair for more than half a minute or something.
Right. Oh yeah, Neil didn't sit around. Neil, there would be the television would be on somewhere, there'd be some weird music and it'd be up loud, there'd be a radio or something, and he'd be there doing all kinds of shit, rapping, juggling, and talking to everybody at once. I mean, you know, he made everybody feel real slow. Real slow.
It's like using all of the possible selves, self,
Yeah.
where all the rest of us sort of just have to poke along on the maybe 1/10 or something.
Right. Yeah. It's because I think everybody just gets sold on the idea that you have one personality, you keep it, and you use it, and it's. I mean, you know.
That's
I mean, my fundamental ideas about what humans are and all that are completely different as a result of having known Neil Cassidy. You know what I mean?
sort of like perception of just the endless possibilities of human existence.
Yeah.
Have you ever read Steppenwolf by
Sure.
Hesse? That sort of thing, I think.
Yeah, it's sort of like that, but
multiple-
take it even. I mean, you know,
Oh, yeah.
keep going. You know, keep going
Well,
with it. You know.
you get further.
But that's
on
a good little
Hesse's
flash. That's a
thing.
psychedelic flash for sure. I mean, and that's, you know, that sense of, I don't know what, boxes within boxes or something.
Chinese puzzle.
Chinese
Yeah.
puzzle.
Endless possibilities.
Yeah.
There's like a long thing in Wolf, and this is sort of historical because I don't quite believe Wolf is right or something, but the whole flash about the hassle with Graham, about the acid graduation.
Mm-hmm.
What was the story on that? I mean, it's supposedly business about DMSO and
No, that's just a
acid,
bunch of shit.
freak out. Yeah, that's right.
I think what it mostly was that I think there was like two elements happening. There was the acid test, people who had experienced the acid test, and the people who were afraid of it. You know, there was basically a conservative element and a radical element. And the radical element wanted to do the acid test graduation, knowing it was going to be groovy, you know. And the conservative element was afraid of it happening.
That was Graham, among others.
Well, yeah, but Graham was just, you know, he was just the guy who happened to be the guy who ran the hall and all the rest of that stuff. And he wasn't, it really wasn't a bummer, you know, but it's made out to be. That's what's weird about that book. It creates importance about those situations when they really were, they're nothing. I mean, by that time, whatever it was, the initial energy was gone. It was just it was Kesey coming back into town to go to jail, you know. And it was over. That whole scene was over, and it already had caused what it was going to cause, and those waves are still spreading out now.
Yeah.
The impact was over.
Yeah, of course, I mean, Wolf was finally, you know, there, so, I mean, obviously had to attach some importance to it.
Right, that's what was going on when he
was.
was in town, so
Right.
that seemed important, but really, man, that was nothing. I mean, compared to how far out it was, when it was far out, the idea of not having one last one was nothing, you know, it was so what.
So, have you any idea why Neil's like sort of hanging around in Mexico? I mean, because I don't think he really spent that much time there before.
Just going on a trip.
Except for
No, they went down there, he was down there with Kesey, too, for a while.
Right, well, Kesey was on the run in 66.
Yeah.
But, like, I guess he went back there pretty much a lot. I mean, after...
He ran back there some, you know, I mean, we would see him off and on after the whole acid test thing was over. We would see him off and on. He'd come around to our house, you know, hang out for a few days. Stuff like that, and disappear, leave a bunch of clothes, maybe. You know what I mean? Different things. Neil Cassidy kind of stuff. Yeah.
They just keep moving around.
Right, and one time he split him and JB, that chick. And, you know, the next thing we heard he was dead. Yeah. Really.
Have you ever like thought intellectually or verbally or non-verbally, like of the string of North Beach or the Beat Generation or that whole scene? Not only as it applies to you, but as it applies to everybody generally.
Yeah, well,
Historically, I mean, have you ever?
yeah, I think that was like the slim shot, you know. I think that was the first flash out there. I mean, the beginning of psychedelics was a whole new flash for it. It was new. It affected that scene as much as that scene helped start, you know what I mean, one thing or another, because there was psychedelics brought in the whole Aldous Huxley, you know, classical psychedelics, that kind of trip, which was something that was pretty absent from the beatnik scene. You know, the wine drinking, pot smoking, head and hanging around and raving and arguing and hassling and doing that kind of stuff. I mean, it was like a kind of a beatnik head, and the psychedelic head was different. But they supported each other in weird ways, and eventually turned into something which was not really distinguishable one from another. But all those things were setups in a way. I mean, like, guys like Gary Snyder and stuff like that, who sort of anticipated the whole psychedelic thing by having been into all those people who were dabbling with Zen stuff, you know what I mean, for introducing more and more Eastern consciousness. It was like a setup almost. Psychedelics came, the Tibetan Book of the Dead, blah, blah, all these different, on the level of flow of information that isn't firsthand. And the whole thing, everything started sort of merging one into another. And naturally, the people who were most interested in psychedelics were artists and freaks, beatniks, whatever.
Well, that's the thing. You're talking about, you said something that was really neat, and I don't know how to work on it. It's talking about Neil as sort of the Western prototype of getting high, in the same sense that a Zen master is the Eastern prototype.
Yeah, I thought so. I mean, in terms, like, again, I say in terms of effect on me, and I think everybody in the Grateful Dead who was exposed to him will tell you something like that.
How would you say it affected your music, just literally your music?
It didn't. I mean,
it's like
all it affected was my me. It affected my ability to play a little of my me in addition to playing a little of my music. You know what I mean? And like whatever effect, I can't determine what effect it had on my music. All I can determine is the effect it's had on me as a human being. And it's made it so that I've continued. I mean, I couldn't say. Because there's like two levels of it, right? There's like the whole on the road level, which was like one kind of turn on, and then knowing Neil Cassidy as a human being,
right,
on that face-to-face level was a whole other turn on.
Well, I mean, do you ever feel like, does it ever rise into a conscious level that, like, when you're up on stage and all these kids are coming to hear you and you're playing, that the vibrations that you're transmitting, the knowledge, the feeling, the energy, are you ever conscious?
Yeah, I'm conscious.
Of that you're transmitting something?
I'm conscious of being part of a tradition, right? And part of that tradition, I mean, yeah, I am conscious of it. I'm real conscious of it. In fact, I mean, I have had schemes about putting together a Grateful Dead reading list, in order to arrive at this kind of a head, take these following steps, Well, I mean, things like things like On the Road would be obvious, that would be an obvious flash, and all that, and that just leads you into a whole world of stuff. You know what I mean? It's just all those things, all the things from that era, and then. I mean, I haven't done it. I haven't done it, obviously. But I've thought of it because it would be possible for you to. All the pieces are around. The pieces of whatever that puzzle is that will eventually lead you to into being a different person are around, and they're of this culture.
And Neil sort of, in some senses, what he was aware of, sort of integrated all.
Yeah, I think he created an awful lot of excitement. I think he's responsible for an awful lot of what's going on now.
So in other words, in a way, somewhere there is like a messianic field to transmit this message that, without putting it in those horrible words.
Yeah, in a way, I mean, if I thought that I could do that, I would try to do it, and my attempts to try to do it have been structured somewhat by the things that I've learned, and the way I learned them was through those ways. So, it's there. I mean, it's me. It's part of me now. It's absorbed.
It'll always be part of it.
Yeah, and an important key stuff.
I was just going to, you sort of hinted at something, I want to clarify something in that stuff. But there's always a lot of cultural decides going around. Sometimes they're very conscious, lyric, classic cultural side. Sometimes they're drawn by the mass of people, from people somewhat unwilling with Dylan, I think. And I think you, in a lot of senses. Sort of the dead as a whole, I mean, you know, acid and tripping with the dead concept. I mean, that's a nice part of life.
Yeah, I know what those things are. You know,
Right.
I mean, I understand.
But even that's behind, you know.
Yeah.
Now, how about Neil? How does Neil fit into that? Do you think he was consciously
No. He wasn't
He
that.
was consciously a teacher?
No, I think he was clean.
No, he was pleasing. He was a saint.
Yeah, I think he was clean. I don't think that he would have the potential. For example, Christ had the potential to hang us up here in the 20th century now.
Right.
The waves that he created at that time ended up by hanging us up now. You know, so I don't think that Neil had that hang up. I think that he was open. You know what I mean? I don't think that that will ever happen.
Well, yes, he has.
You know, he has, because there are people who are running this world now, who are like motivated by weird Christian weirdness. That's what I'm saying. I'm not saying the guy. You know, I'm saying what I'm saying his reflection.
The waves he created.
No, I'm not talking about any of that stuff. I'm talking about like I'm talking about the way that, for example, English is structured a certain way because of Christian ethics.
Right.
I'm talking about that kind of stuff, subtle entrapments, you know what I mean? Where I mean the Christian, you know, the Western mind.
It's the classical Western. Sorry I deserted you last night.
It's okay.
I didn't know whether I was doing you good or doing you bad.
Oh, no, you were doing me good, man.
Okay. Good. So, I was just totally wasted.
Right. That was nice, though. I like your company. It's a gas.
In a sense, this is repetitious, but I want to read you something you said before.
Sure.
And mostly because I just like another example, and I'm still trying to do the impossible, but really I totally understand it.
Okay, go ahead. I'm willing to help.
You're talking about Neil, the 100% communicator, quote, had a stream going, and you could always jump right on it and be right in it, and he would always take into account that you were there. He was a model of a completely far-out guy.
Yeah.
Could you try and talk about one time when he was doing that sort of communicating and you were sort of flashing off of it?
No.
I really didn't think so.
Not really. I can't really.
I think you might have said, I think you already have enough faith.
I could set up a situation. I mean, the only thing I could do would be to set up a situation where you could see some people who had been exposed to that enough to flash on it as a tool, and who could use it as a tool. And there are people around, you know, who are capable of doing that, and that's. You know, that's the only way that I could think of to be able to try to communicate that, and it invariably works. It always works. It's one of those things that when you see people doing this, it's funny. That to me, that's part of the key, is that there's a funny thing. And when you see this particular kind of communication working, you understand immediately what it is, and you also understand immediately how to do it. It's like an infection. I mean, you get it, you know. And a lot of people have gotten it.
But it seems
like an infection.
It is. I mean, it's just,
That's
you know.
beautiful.
It just seems that it's an infection that has to be passed hand to hand, pretty much. Because, I mean, like, to me, Neil could be...
Wavy Granby is a guy that was infected by the
yeah.
Cassie thing, and I mean, you could ask him about it. You know, he learned a lot from it. That guy Paul Foster.
Yeah, because I mean, Neil's probably the ultimate mythic, contemporary mythic American figure to millions of people. But so few people really have any understanding.
But that's good. That's what I mean by clean.
But I want to make it more. I would like to see it. I don't know if I can do it. I would like to see it, you know, extended,
right,
more fully.
But I think it's weird to create a posthumous personality cult.
Well, I'm not certain I want to. Like, even want to see, personality types, those are probably useless, but to pick up on the things that he had to say,
Well,
the things that he did.
he
The
had
thing
to be
was,
there.
he did it himself. Say that again?
You had to be there.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, I don't.
I mean, those things
that's
already
the last
picked
word
up
on
on.
it.
Right. I think that Kerouac did a great job.
Yeah, he did.
I think he did a great job, man. I mean, a lot of the spirit and the flash and the syntax and stuff of Neil is really there in those things. It's really there. I think that he's the guy that came closest. I don't think there's no one else who's been anywhere near that successful. That thing of that across the border thing of Kesey's has got the character in there, Houlihan, is Cassidy, and it's a new book of Kesey's called Kesey's Garage Sale, and it's just a thing like a screenplay in there called Across the Border, and it's loosely based on that trip in Mexico. But one of the characters in there is this guy Houlihan, which is really patterned after Cassidy, and Kesey has a gift for the way people talk, and he's got Cassidy's flow down there more or less pretty good.
Good. Because I ripped that out of it. That was in a magazine. I ripped that out and stuck it somewhere.
Yeah.
I never got a chance.
It's not the whole thing. It's just a piece of it. I think it was an excerpt. I think it might be the whole thing.
I can check it.
It isn't really too good. I mean, in terms of being entertaining or anything. But it's got some Cassidy in it.
Worth a look.
Yeah.
How many more days you gonna be on this trip?
Let's see. I think we're going home Tuesday.
Tuesday. Are you passing back to New York at all?
Don't think so. We're going. Let's see. After the next one is Waterbury. Then I think we do that festival, and then Grateful Dead gig, or the Grateful Dead gig, then the festival.
What's that?
Washington D.C.
Oh, with the omnibus.
Oh, that's JFK Stadium.
Yeah. What I'm trying to say is